Now let's talk about doing responsive design with React. Again, the idea is you could do stuff just with CSS, but it may sometimes be easier to do certain things in React itself. Let's create a new React project. The first thing we're going to do is add to our package the fact that we want to use the new package that provides some nice hooks called React Responsive. We'll go ahead and install that. By the way, if you just do an npm install, then that is going to install a package, but it's not going to save it in the package.json. So that's why npm install --save is what you normally want to be using. In our case, you may not have easy access to the npm command line, so it's easiest to just put it in package.json itself. Once we've done this, let's go ahead and look at our app.js. Let's actually just run this and make sure we're working well. So that looks good. Let's go ahead and edit some of that stuff. Let's go ahead and change what gets generated. So here's some lorem ipsum stuff. And there's this. I'm not sure how we ended up centered. It must have been from our app.css. Let's just go ahead and get rid of that. Actually, we can see that there was already a media query in the default React application. So prefers reduced motion is one of the examples of a query you can make. So you can prefer reduced motion. I think either the user can specify it, but certainly also depending on the device you have. So let me give you an example. If you're going to print, let's go ahead and actually just try that. Let's come back here and let's restore everything. And then we'll come back and look. Now, if we go to print, notice it's not spinning. The reason for that is we prefer reduced motion if we're on a printed page. We'd rather have no motion at all because we can't support motion. If we're on a Kindle Reader, for example, that's a case where it's really slow to re-update. And so another case where we probably prefer reduced motion. So if we were running this on a Kindle, we would get no motion. If there's no preference, then we spin. Otherwise, we don't spin. All right, but I am going to actually just get rid of all this and get rid of our logo and get rid of all this stuff and go back and get our lorem ipsum. Okay, so there's our lorem ipsum stuff. Let's look at an example, for instance, of something simple. And let's say we're generating a navbar if we're not in print mode. So what we have is you use media query. So we can do something like this. Const is print equals use media query. And then we can do a query. Let's go ahead and use a media query. So a media query returns true or false based on whether a particular setting is true. So let's do something like this. Use media query, and then we can actually put in something like this. We use the camel case here. So max width is, I don't know, 500. Okay. And it should return us true if our max width is 500 and false otherwise. And also, if the width ever changes, of course, will be re-rendered. Let's go ahead and put in an image if we are not narrow. So we'll use this. We want to have a closing tag for the image. Great. And now if we reformat, looks good. So let's go ahead and look, Chrome. And what do we get? We get, well, of course, this giant image. One thing to note, by the way, is in React, when it creates your indexed HTML, it does use the metadata viewport for you. So set that up for you automatically. So you don't need to add this piece to your head in order to get the responsive design. Let's go ahead and set the CSS such that the max width is 100% and the max height is 100%. And so that looks good. What we have here now is this works great until we get a little smaller and then the tomato disappears. And then tomatoes disappearing again because of this code here that is only including the image tag if we're narrow. We could, of course, have a variety of different media queries here. We could have queries either at the app level, and then we could just pass this down to other components, or we could have the components themselves, if necessary, call use media query. And we could, of course, use constants for some of these values instead of redefining them. And then a third is you can actually use what in React is called a context, which provides a way to provide some information throughout all of the components in your application. But in general, this is how use media query works. And that's the simplest way that you can have a responsive layout using React itself. Often you may have a combination of using both React and CSS in order to get the best responsive design. But if you consider, for instance, if you're doing the same thing in CSS where we didn't want to display the tomato would still be part of the HTML. It would just be display none. So it actually wouldn't be displayed. So it would be part of the DOM, but not displayed. If you are doing your work in React, as we are here, then it doesn't even end up as part of the DOM. Let's also look at how we might do a navbar. So let's make it really narrow, something like this. And let's say that if we're not narrow, I'm going to go ahead and put in a navbar. We'll have just a couple of steps. So we'll have nav1, nav2, and nav3. And let's just take a look at this. And we're missing something. So we're supposed to have our closing nav. And of course, we're not closing it right. We have our nav1 and nav2 and nav3, and let's just fix those so they're horizontal instead of a vertical. List. I want this to be display flex. So we have a space between them in the navbar. That might not really be what we want, but it's close enough. We might want to have them over to the right, let's say. But now what we'd like to do is, if it's narrow, let's just go ahead and put a hamburger icon. So here's a hamburger icon. This is the trigram for heaven. Good to know. And let's make this, just do something like this. We'll just print out that we were pressed. Let's change this to 600 so we can actually do it without having to go into the console. Let's see, we're turning into a hamburger icon that's nice. And if we inspect, and click on, and we can actually display this. Now it would be just a matter of displaying vertically the items in the navbar. And I suppose there are a variety of ways we could do that. We could maybe reuse this. So extract this out and then style it differently. So maybe we would set a class for the underlying lists saying that this is the vertical navbar instead of a horizontal navbar. That would be one possibility of what we could do. That's the basics of doing our responsive design in React.